for our kitchen instructions.
3, 2.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Explain This, live from Explain This Studios. I'm here with Robin Riddle. What's going on?
Not much. How are you?
I'm excited to be here with you today.
Yes.
And we've got an exciting topic that is confusing for me.
Okay.
I've always been told you need to eat organic.
Yes, we say this all the time.
But yet I don't know when it's true, what does it mean, and why.
Why?
So let's talk about it.
So today I'm going to go into the why behind this, because this is something that we tell patients all the time. Mm-hmm. Try to eat fresh and organic as much as possible. And I feel like sometimes people are just like, yeah, okay, whatever. So I'm here today to explain to you why we need to eat organic and when it's super important to be doing this. So first, a little bit of background. Pesticides on our crops, that's what we're trying to get away from whenever we say to eat organic. That's one of the big things they're not supposed to be doing is treating those with pesticides. Non-organic crops are treated with multiple different types of pesticides in order to protect them against insects, control weeds, control disease on the crops. So for the farmers growing it, they can grow more, they can grow faster, they can grow it without running into a bunch of issues. Okay.
So it increases production.
Exactly.
Okay.
So that's why they want to use these pesticides. Nearly 75% of non-organic fresh produce sold in the U.S. has residue of pesticides on it when it gets to in source. When it gets to you, non-organic still has residue of pesticides on it.
And we're reaping the consequences of that,
exactly.
I feel like. And we've had a lot of episodes talking about certain toxins and environmental toxins that we deal with just by eating regular food.
Exactly. So you pick up some apples and you think like, oh, this is great. I'm eating apples. I'm being healthy. But it has chemicals that are sitting on that are actually very harmful for our bodies. So safety of pesticides really cannot be established. Nobody's going to be like, yes, I volunteer. Let me eat those pesticides at certain amounts to decide how much of it's safe. So there's really not an established safety profile. It's more that harm has to be shown before the FDA will tell them they can't use it anymore.
And that could take years.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. Even once we have studies that show like, hey, this probably isn't the best for the body, they still allow it to be used. But what level is not okay is different for different people. So if you already have a high toxic burden from, heavy metal exposures in childhood or something like that,
okay.
You may be able to handle a whole lot less before you have medical issues than someone else who doesn't have as much of a toxic burden. So there's so many variables into it. It's better just to not have the pesticides to begin with.
Right.
This is where eating organic comes in. So there's some different resources that I really like to use that are helpful, that stay up to date about knowing what your best foods are that you really, really need to be organic on, and ones that maybe we can slack a little bit on.
I love that.
So this is the EWG, Environmental Workers Group. It's a shopper's guide that uses information that came from the FDA. So like this year's is up to date, 2023's guide is out. And FDA and the Department of Agriculture test a bunch of different foods. So for this year's, they tested over 46,000 samples of 46 different fruits and vegetables. So we're looking at produce alone with this one. And then they give you the statistics of all of those non-organic, how much pesticides were found on them.
And they do this every year? So it's based on like a current crop?
Right. And they don't always do every single fruit and vegetable that's out there. So obviously there's more than 46 different types of fruits and vegetables. But this year they picked 46 different ones, over 46,000 samples within those to see what's coming up on them. For the testing, they do proper cleaning. So whatever you would do at home prior to eating it, that's the way they're processing it. So if the peel is supposed to come off of it, they peel it. If it's supposed to be scrubbed or washed or whatever, they are washing it prior to doing this testing. So that's key. This is not just straight out of the ground what's on it. This is cleaned and processed, what's left on it.
So washing does actually help a little bit, like prior to eating? Probably a stupid
Probably
question.
a little bit. Probably a little bit.
Okay.
We'll talk about better ways to help here in a minute.
Okay.
But so even with proper cleaning, they found traces of up to 250 different types of pesticides on these foods that they tested. So it's not just like one or two, 250 different types of pesticides. Even several of the green bean samples had residue of a toxic pesticide that had been outlawed over 10 years ago that's still being used in some crops.
So, is there not any regulations that?
Not really.
Okay, so you can
Not
just put
really.
on your crops whatever you want.
Yeah. Yeah. There's not a ton of regulations out there on this. There's a lot of loopholes for it.
Yeah.
And so people do whatever they can to get the most crops that they can.
Well, this is why we have to look at resources like this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the EWG's website does something called the Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen.
Yep.
Clean 15 are the foods that if you need to eat non-organic, these are the ones you can get away with and probably be pretty okay. So this year's Clean 15, avocados, sweet corn, pineapple, onions, papaya, sweet peas, but only frozen ones. Don't ask me why. Asparagus, honeydew melon, kiwi,
Okay.
cabbage, mushrooms, mangoes, sweet potatoes, watermelon, and carrots.
So that's the 2023 Clean,
Clean
15.
15.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
don't need organic for these.
Don't necessarily need to be organic. So almost 65% of the Clean 15 fruits and vegetable samples had no detectable pesticide residues on them
Interesting.
after cleaned appropriately. So like an avocado, nobody eats the peel of an avocado, so they've cut this open and scooped it out.
Got it.
The avocado, the fruit of it,
Got it.
had no pesticides. Avocados and sweet corn were the cleanest produce. Less than 2% of any of those samples showed any level of detectable pesticides within them, which is awesome. Just over 10% of the Clean 15 fruits and vegetable samples had residue of 2 or more pesticides, so still very low on the list. And no sample of those first 6 that I said had any more than 3 pesticides on them at all. So they're not perfect. There still may be some pesticides, but they're much cleaner than other foods.
And it seems like when you're playing the organic game, it's not a perfect thing. It's a what's your best option?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Not everywhere always has organic everything, but there are things that I'm going to get to now that are really important. If you eat them organic.
So stay away from these unless they're organic.
Exactly.
Okay.
These are the Dirty Dozen. Strawberries, spinach, kale, collard greens, mustard greens. They kind of clump those all in together. Peaches, pears, nectarines, apples, grapes, bell peppers, and hot peppers. They group those together. Cherries, blueberries, and green beans. That's the Dirty Dozen.
I like all those.
I know.
That's
So
a bummer.
you need to eat those organic. Those are really important. So more than 90% of the samples of strawberries, apples, cherries, spinach, nectarines, and grapes tested positive for residue of 2 or more pesticides.
Wow.
90% of the samples.
Unbelievable.
A total of 210 different types of pesticides were found on these Dirty Dozen. So tons and tons of pesticides are hanging on to these things.
So Dirty Dozen, we need to find organic.
We need to find organic.
Okay.
All of the produce on the Dirty Dozen had at least one sample that had at least 13 different types of pesticides within that sample. Some of them up to 23.
Wow.
So like one class of blueberries that they pulled could have had up to 23 different types of pesticides just in that one sample of them.
That's kind of scary.
It is scary. Like when
Yeah.
you really get down to the numbers of it, it's a lot. And that's what we're putting into our body, thinking that we're being healthy.
Blueberries.
Blueberries.
You think you're just eating the
Yeah.
best food of all time.
Yeah, except
But
you've
you're
got
not.
toxic pesticides on those. Kale, collard, and mustard greens, as well as hot peppers and bell peppers, had the most detectable pesticides of any crop. 103 different types of pesticides found on the kale, collard, mustard greens. 101 different types of pesticides found on the group of green peppers and hot peppers.
Wow.
Yeah.
Goodness gracious. I had no idea there
Yeah.
was even that many pesticides.
Kale wants to kill you when it's not organic. Okay. These studies that they have looked at, they've linked higher consumption of organic foods to lower urinary pesticide levels. So the more organic you're eating, the less pesticides your body's having to filter out because the less pesticides you're eating. Improved fertility, improved birth outcomes, reduced incidence of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, lower BMI, less type 2 diabetes,
Okay. Wow.
just from avoiding the pesticides on your food and eating organic. If you have to eat non-organic produce, especially within that Dirty Dozen, one trick that you can do to help a little bit here is actually soak all of your produce in water with baking soda for at least 15 minutes before you're planning on consuming it.
That's a cool trick.
Yeah, so it can help.
Okay.
So like if you're, out and you can't find your organic apples that you normally get the regular ones, put them in a big pot of water, put some baking soda in there with it, and just let it sit for a little bit. And that can actually help to pull the pesticides off the surface of the fruit or vegetable.
Off topic, but I've heard great things about baking soda.
Baking soda does all kinds of awesome things.
Right? Isn't that wild? And it can take away the pesticides.
It can take away the pesticides. So that's the big deal about eating organic produce.
Okay.
Then my big deal about eating organic when we get into our packaged foods, and a lot of you have probably heard of this, but there is a weed Roundup, so glyphosate. It's the active ingredient in Roundup. It is a toxic pesticide that is widely used on crops like wheat, corn, soy, and oats. So like specifically for oats, they will spray it with that Roundup right before harvesting, and it helps to dry them out faster. But spraying them on crops right before harvest also means that you get a ton of it coming through and sticking onto that produce or that harvest that they've just made.
When I think of pesticides, I think of the Roundup thing.
Right. And so that's the one that's
famous,
gotten
I'm
the
sure.
most press. Yeah, the Monsanto or whatever. There's been tons and tons of lawsuits going into this. So studies done by the EWG found glyphosate in all but 2 out of 45 different products that they sampled. So they went to the store, pulled a bunch of products that are made with oats and wheat and things like that. And 43 of those 45 samples had the glyphosate in them. And not only in there, but above what they consider to be a safe level. Now, the safe levels that they're talking about in children. So they allow 160 parts per billion to be in things. Now, how have we established that any of this is safe? I don't really know. Like, I don't want my kid eating any of that chemical. I'm not going to be like, okay, you can drink a little bit of Roundup, but not a lot. We're gonna stop like right about here. No, like in general, it's not something that should be in our food, especially not in our kids' food. And a lot of the products that they're finding it in are things that are targeted towards children. So Cheerios. Regular Cheerios are one of the worst. Honey Nut Cheerios Medley was also really bad. I don't know what that one is, but lots of different Cheerio products
That's interesting. I would not think of like
really high amounts.
Cheerios cereals having pesticides. I would think fruit, that whole thing, but not Cheerios.
Yeah, like tons. So glyphosate has been linked to cancers. There are literally thousands of lawsuits out there right now. There was one lawsuit that the guy was awarded like $298 million in a lawsuit against the Monsanto Roundup people. So lots of links to cancer, lots of lawsuits about it. It's even been labeled as a probable carcinogen by the WHO, International Agency for Research on Cancer. Yet we're still using it. So
it's crazy.
It can also be found in some organic products. So organic is not completely free of this 100% of the time.
And this is the Roundup?
This is the Roundup, the glyphosate, because if they're growing near a crop that gets sprayed with it, sometimes there's a little bit of carryover. It's nowhere near the amount that is in non-organic products. And you can get ones that are completely like tested and completely free of this. And it will be marked on labels if it is.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
The label thing is kind of interesting to me. And I like, how do you know? Like, what are we looking for?
Well, you've got to research. So even if it says like non-GMO on it, because I think Cheerios are marked like that non-GMO. So you think like, oh, I'm getting something really good.
Right.
That doesn't mean it doesn't have this. Okay. So organic products are going to be a lot better. So if you want Cheerios, get a brand that makes organic ones. It's going to be better. Okay. It's not guaranteed to be 100% free of the Roundup chemical unless it says that specifically on there. Okay. So it can be marked and say no glyphosate free. That means they have tested that whole batch. None of that's on there. Wow. There was a big thing a couple years ago. Bob's Red Mill is a good organic brand that a lot of people like, but in testing, they found a little bit of this in here. People were all up in arms about it. They weren't marked saying they were completely free of it. They were just marked as organic. So anyways, that's you can get a little bit of carryover with it. But so many of the products that were high, like I said, are targeted towards children. Goldfish crackers were one that just floored me. But like I said, Cheerios, so 160 parts per billion allowed. Cheerios had over 700 parts per billion.
Surely not Honey Nut Cheerios.
Honey Nut Cheerios was a little bit less. Regular Cheerios were the 700, but Cheerios brand all of their products are on the list.
That's wild.
Nature's Valley, which everybody thinks like, oh, it says nature in it. It's
Yeah.
green. No, almost every single one of their products are over. Quaker Oats, like everything that they pulled and tested.
Is Nature's Valley the granola bar?
The granola bars,
Dang.
they've got all that.
A lot
Yeah.
of those.
Yeah, those were high, like anywhere from 5 to 700 parts per billion on most of those.
That's wild.
So this information is all out there if you
Yeah.
go look for it.
Yeah.
Best thing you can do, buy organic as much as possible. If you're looking at food for your kids, really get in depth on what are the ingredients within that. And I've got a few more podcasts we're going to do talking about food ingredients. But this is a huge one. Buy organic as much as you possibly can. If you're doing oats, find ones that say that they are completely free of this in general. It can make a big difference, a really big difference in your health.
Now, for meat, are you eating only organic?
Personally, yes, and I
Okay.
advise that my patients do.
Okay.
And so the reason for organic meat is a couple of different things, and I'm talking about meat, fish, and eggs within this.
Oh, okay.
Eating organic means that those products actually contain higher nutritional value. So all the things that they do to non-organic meat, the way that they feed it, like the grain that they feed, the fact that it's not out in a pasture, all of that decreases its nutritional value.
Got it.
Farm-raised, non-organic farm-raised fish, it's not even worth it. You've got to get, like, if you're going to do salmon, you need to do like the wild caught sockeye salmon. Your salmon should not be pink, it should be red. If it's pink, you shouldn't even really be eating it. It doesn't have the nutritional value it needs. But when we get into organic meats, we're getting higher nutritional value out of them, more omega-3, lower omega-6. So non-organic meats tend to be higher in omega-6, which is more inflammatory. So again, we can think that we're eating good things. Hey, I'm eating chicken. It's nice. And no, it can actually be more inflammatory.
So there is no clean 2, dirty 5 of like in
No,
meats.
go
Okay.
organic,
Go organic.
Grass-fed, pasture-raised, all the things. Plus, in doing that, we're avoiding all the chemicals and the hormones and the antibiotics that they're feeding those animals, because that does go through into the meat. So when it comes to meat, organic, that's the best way to go.
So what you said is basically all these resources are out there.
They are out there. EWG is an absolutely fantastic website to read and figure out what your products are that you really need to be, again, looking for clean, like the Clean 15, what the ones are that we really need to be doing organic. There's a lot of information there.
What we'll do in the description below, guys, we will link a couple of these websites so you can go straight there after this video. Robin, is that a show?
That is a show.
That's a show. Guys, explain this. You name it, we explain it as always. We'll see you guys next time.
Don't go away.